Again, my name is Ray Paik. I've been at GitLab for not quite 2 years. It'll be 2 years in June. And I definitely want to make this session interactive. Like, if you have any questions, like, feel free to stop me, raise your hand, yell my name. Don't feel like you need to hold your questions till the end. Happy to answer them, and please remind me to repeat your questions, so it'll be recorded. It's always great to be at a conference over the weekend, because you know that people care about the topic or care about the thing, because otherwise, why would you give up your weekend to be here? So appreciate you being here on a Saturday. There's my Twitter handle if you want to reach out to me after the presentation with questions or comments. I definitely appreciate it. So here's the agenda. These are the topics I want to cover. I said I want to make this interactive, so I want to try out like a word association game. Like, this is an experiment that might fail spectacularly, but I want to try that out to get audience participation. And I'll tell you a little bit about my background, not because I like to talk about myself, but I think there will be a helpful context in terms of what I sort of learned when I came to GitLab, because this was always a fascinating question for me. Like, when I worked in a more traditional open source projects, I wasn't quite sure what motivates developers to contribute to a company-led open source project. So that was, wanted to share some of the learnings. Talk about some of the differences between traditional open source projects with lots of different companies involved versus a single company-led project like at GitLab. And why does community form, and how does it work? That's the next topic. And then I'll also talk about some of the things that not just myself, but a lot of our colleagues have tried to do to support community members. So like I said, feel free to stop me with questions at any point. So word association game. So when you hear the term company-led open source project, what are some of the things that come to mind? Anybody have any? Somebody above has a, yeah. Is that a Morse code? Okay. So just as a reward for speaking up, I got some swags here. So if you volunteer any information, feel free to come here and pick up a pair of stuff. Go ahead. Roadmap? Oh, okay, so I'm going to write some of these down. Anything else? Yes? Open core, yep. Wow, whoever it is really going at it. But yes, sir. Subscription. Wow, Jonathan stopped the person from above. Anything else, or any other phrases or words that come to mind when you hear? Go ahead. Okay. Yep. Yeah. No, but cool. Anything else? But forums? Okay, like discourse forums and okay. Anything else? Huh? CLA. Favorite 3-letter acronym for many people. Go ahead. Money. Okay. Getting right to the point. Review of community contributions? Okay. Cool. All right, these are good lists. So if you did speak up, with the exception of John, because he already has a pair, please feel free to come, pick up a pair of socks before you leave. And I think what I'll do is, maybe if you have time towards the end, I don't think there's a whole lot of risk of running out of time. We can come back and revisit some of these words that you all contributed. I appreciate you doing this. So we'll move on to the, whoops, I'm not presenting. Yep. That's what happened. So I'll talk about a little bit about how I got introduced to community management. I really got involved in community management and open source when I joined the Linux Foundation in 2014. And when I joined back then, one of the first things I got involved in is launching of this project called OPNFV. You see the third logo on the top. The acronym stands for Open Platform for Network Function Virtualization. It really rolls off the tongue. I mean, basically, it's a project for the telco industry. I mean, I think a lot of you know, telco was lagging behind the traditional data center space in terms of virtualization, a lot of their functions. So that was a project with a lot of the service providers and equipment and solution providers working together. And it was actually really instructive. I got involved when sort of the formation discussion really kicked into gear with a lot of the potential members, because there was a lot of discussion on governance, as you can imagine, because members joined, they want to make sure that there's a governance structure they're comfortable with. So there was a lot of governance discussion about technical community, including like what the technical steering committee is going to look like, what their roles are, what their responsibilities are, how the releases will be done, and also like a popular, I think another topic that we got into heated discussions about was on the project life cycle. How do you incubate a project? How does one graduate, et cetera, et cetera. So it was really instructive. I mean, after having been away from open source for a while, sort of getting indoctrinated in that way was pretty helpful. And the other helpful thing about OPNFV was that unlike a lot of open source projects, this was more focused on integrating a lot of the upstream components. Like you see in Open Daylight, that was probably one of the largest like a networking projects at the LF. And also projects outside of the LF, like OpenStack. I mean, OpenStack was probably our core upstream community that we work with. So that allowed me to work with different communities, so see how their events are done, how they work with technical communities. So it was really instructive. And I might be going into too much detail, but the other thing that happened at the LF after several years is that a lot of other networking projects sort of popped up, like you see FIDO, ONAP, Panda, and others. And it really made sense to simplify the governance by bringing it all together under a single umbrella called LF networking. So we went through what felt like a mergers and acquisition phase. So I felt like I went through the full life cycle of open source projects. And then, I mean, it was time for me to sort of move on after about 4 years. And luckily, I had an opportunity at GitLab. And I don't know, how many of you heard about our handbook at GitLab? I mean, we try to like document everything in terms of what each department does at GitLab and how different programs are run. So when you're looking for a job, it's really helpful because you get a really insight into what goes on in the organization. So I felt like I was pretty well armed. Like during the interview process, I got to learn how GitLab operates. And I'm still staying in open source. And I think one of the things that people have to go through an adjustment period for when they join GitLab is working remotely. But I was working remotely at the LF anyway. So it's like I've already been working remotely for 4 years. So I thought the transition would be pretty seamless. Like I didn't think it would be, I didn't necessarily think I would find something like very surprising when I started. And that, as you can imagine, that wasn't necessarily the case. There are a couple of things that I'll talk about that took me a while to get used to. So sorry, this is a busy slide with a lot of images. But open source projects, I mean, the way people operate typically is that you do a lot of work asynchronously. Like developers are all over the world. I mean, in the technical work like submitting patches, doing code reviews, working on releases, a lot of those work are done asynchronously. But however, a lot of the projects, like, I mean, Kubernetes, OpenStack, the large ones, you still have a lot of meetings, like on Zoom, GoToMeeting, or WebEx, whatever their favorite conferencing tool happens to be. So, I mean, if you live in the Pacific time zone like I do, I mean, you can fill up your calendar between 6 to 9 a.m. just going to meetings. If you wanted to do that, it's probably not a good idea, but you have a lot of meetings. But the benefit is that you have a lot of opportunity to work with somebody synchronously, like real time. You get real feedback in various meetings or working groups. And not only do you have a lot of meetings, but you also have a lot of chance to work like face to face, at least like 2 or 3 times a year. Like you can go to like a KubeCon's a huge event. They get together a couple of times a year, and developers get together at various like technical hackathons or other events. And it's not unusual if you work on like projects like OpenStack, you see a lot of your community members like 2 or 3 times a year, like a week at a time. It's almost like a long distance relationship. You're away from each other and talking to each other on the phone or doing email or IRC, and then you spend the whole week, like, during the day you're working together, in the evening you're out socializing. But the point is you have a lot of real-time interaction. But when I came to GitLab, that wasn't really there. Like when I started, like, when you change jobs, the nice thing is that your calendar is pretty clear. But when I looked at my calendar, there wasn't anything where I was meeting with community members. So I felt really isolated. And that was like really startling. I think that was like a top thing that I had to sort of figure out how to fix that. So one of the things, I obviously like reach out on a one-on-one basis to people to get to know them and find out why they're contributing. But I also started a monthly meeting called a core team meeting. So we have a core team at GitLab, and the core team are individuals that have been making sustained contributions to GitLab over a period of time. And we go through like a nomination and a voting process. And I mean, right now the core team has 7 people there. But I started a monthly meeting because one of the things I realized was that they weren't like necessarily like talking to each other either, like throughout the year. So I started a meeting. Wasn't quite sure how it was going to work out, but I mean, we meet once a month, and it's a sort of good time for us to sort of get like a synchronous feedback with people and have a synchronous conversation. So that was one of the first things I had to do, but that took me a while to get used to. And you'll see on the bottom left, on your left, you'll see something that looks like an org chart. This is the governing structure for the LF networking. It's still on the website, so I just pasted it there. So the reason why I put that there is that in a lot of open source projects, like large open source projects, you have like working groups, like a project teams and different governance structure where all the community members get involved to a point where like it's something like in the marketing committee, you have visibility into like, how much budget's getting allocated for various events, which events people are going to, and then you have opportunity to provide direct feedback. But at company-led open source projects like at GitLab, I mean, you'll have a lot of visibility into issues, but you're not really getting yourself involved in a lot of our, planning in terms of how we're marketing GitLab, the product, or even the project, or even getting involved in like a release decision processes, right? Like which features are getting released for 13.0. That mostly done by our product managers and even engineering managers, but community members I think, like in most cases, their focus is a lot narrower. There are certain areas that they're interested in. For example, they're interested in the front end for issue boards, right? That's the area that really interests them, and those are the areas that they focus on. Like other areas, like products that are unrelated to like the issue board, they probably won't have too much interest in like following. So the focus is obviously a lot narrower for company-led projects. The social media, so this is one thing, like looking back on my time at the LF, this is probably something that I should have done a better job with. I didn't do like a whole lot of, I didn't tweet anything that was work-related when I was at the LF, I don't think, and then I maybe wrote like 2 blog posts. I just like relied on my marketing team colleagues to sort of do, I used to call them like the social media stuff, and then, that was, I didn't pay too much attention to it. But when you work at like a company-based project where you don't have a whole lot of opportunities to interact with community members, I mean, social media becomes an important tool. I mean, that's sort of thing that I learned early on. I mean, as an anecdote, when I started, I mean, Emily Van Hoffman, she was on the social team at the time. She pinged me and said, Ray, you realize your Twitter profile is private. And I mean, first of all, I didn't even know what that meant. Like, so what does that mean? And then I didn't even remember like consciously making that choice. So you know, she sort of had to give me like a one-on-one tutorial on how that works. So that's how like inactive audience that becomes a critical tool. So those are some of the early learnings, and I'll point out some of the other differences for company-led projects. I mean, one is metrics. I mean, you probably see metrics like this in any open source projects, and you can, the source of the visualizations from contributors.gitlab.com. So I saw this a lot at OpenStack, because the OpenStack community members are interested in which companies are active in the project. So when they look at a pie chart like on the left, they want to see who are the top 10 contributing companies, for example. But what you see with the company-led projects is that the largest piece of the pie, it's probably over 95%, is the affiliation is just unknown, because people are doing this on their own time. It's not part of their job. It shows up as unknown because their email is probably like gmail.com or other, like a personal email address, right? I mean, we do have organizations that are actively contributing to GitLab. Like, I mean, Siemens is a prime example. They've been a large customer of ours for a long time, but they also have a huge number of people, probably over a dozen, that are actively contributing to GitLab because through merge requests, because they find that they can, influence changes a lot faster that way. But that's more exception than the rule. I mean, we have a lot of customers like T-Mobile and Renault, and I think CERN's another one there that are doing it, but it's definitely in the minority. And so the way you look at metrics is more individual contributor based versus, keeping track of like companies or organizations. I mean, like Takuya, he's one of our core team members. He's been very active in terms of both contributions and organizing meetups. I think I know him pretty well. I know he works at a bank in Japan. Like I can't remember which bank, but so because the conversation never really comes up in terms of who he's working for. The other one this is something I'm trying to get better at is, I mean, I think if you talk to a lot of community managers, one of the things that a lot of us enjoy is recognizing community members for thanking them for the work they've done. And it really makes our day when they sort of celebrate their achievements, like on Twitter. So you'll see a couple of like a Twitter post here, like one on the left is Karshi, he won a hackathon grand prize in Q4, so he's showing off the wares he got in mail. And then we also send out this mug to celebrate your first MR that gets merged. So it's awesome to see these like on social media, and then I like seeing those get like retweeted and getting liked. But what I'm struggling with is that, I mean, the celebration seems kind of like, I don't know how to put it. Like, I wish I could make this like a lot more public, because one of the things I enjoyed when I was at the LF was that, I mean, I'll typically recognize people during like summits or the release planning meetings where you'll have like 100+ developers in the same room. I love getting people up on stage and handing them awards and shaking their hands. And this seems somewhat like detached, and it's more one-on-one, and it's not like widely shared, although it's on Twitter. So I feel like I'm just doing this, just going to somebody's desk and just sort of patting them on the back and walking away. It seems, I wish I can do something a little bit more and that's a little bit more meaningful. And I don't know if you've seen, I gave a similar talk at FOSDAM last month, and people came to me with some ideas. I forget the name of the project, but they had once a year they give plushies, and it's only given out to top X contributors, and it's really coveted. It's like a plushie doll of their mascot that gets handed out. But I mean, I don't know if anyone's seen other cool a recognition that gets done in communities that you want to share, or I mean, this is something that I definitely want to get better at, and maybe I need to do a monthly blog of here are all the wonderful things that community members have done and make it more public. But I feel like I could do more than just walking to their desk and just giving them a high five and walking away. That's what I feel like it happens a lot of times. But go ahead.
Well, I used to work for PagerDuty, and when we started the community site and made a concerted effort to hire a community team, more evangelists to actually go out and give a talk, we actually, I'm not sure who will get to this, we took people who actually stopped contributing and being evangelists for us, and actually invited them to PagerDuty Summit, which was our event in San Francisco, paid for their trip, paid for all the food, and gave them some special swag. And that was based off of a session from Community Leadership Summit that I went to a few years ago, with the theme of basically you want to give people status, access, power, and then stuff. And I unfortunately did not get to launch the recognition program that gave people more stuff, but I worked on something that was being developed.
Cool. Yeah.
Which included just basically making it a formalized process where people can actually see what will get them up.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think for people who couldn't hear, inviting key contributors to your company events or something, right? And then we've also we've been doing that for core team members as well. We meet GitLab is 100% virtual, but every 9 months we try to get together face to face. We've always invited core team members. That's one of the perks, I guess. And then starting last year, we also invited other contributors as well. And then we're going to do the same thing in about 3 weeks, but our events got canceled because it wasn't. But yeah, I mean, I think and the same thing. We pay for their travels. We cover all the expenses while they're there. Yeah, I mean, and that's a good thing. But I think the challenge for us is that I feel like it only happens once a year, and it's not necessarily immediate. I mean, yeah, we still want to continue doing that. But and then for budget reasons, I think John, I can't remember, we maybe invited not including core team members, maybe 7 people. Yeah, and then we're trying to figure out. I mean, we also just kicked off our first user conference last year. We invited some of the community members there, but I mean, I think that's a good way to not just recognize them with trips, but also, because I mean, FaceTime is something that we really lack, like I was saying earlier, right? So I think it's a good opportunity to do that. And I mean, it's really important to really pay for their travel, because they're doing this in their own time. They're not going to be able to convince their employers to pay for their trips, right? And then the other challenge with that, with the community members, coming to our events, they love to come, but if you work in the U.S., you have very limited vacation time. We're asking them to spend a 5 days of vacation to come to our event, and I found that sometimes to be a challenge. But anyhow, any other ideas or things that you've seen in other communities? Go ahead.
Your reflection about social media engagement from your time at LS Networking.
Yeah.
Implemented in 1 year. And you would incorporate the reach of GitLab social media network.
Right. Yeah.
Instagram, Twitter.
Right.
That might be a good way to
Okay.
regular
Yeah.
community members, like maybe a merge of the week or contribution of the week, and
Right.
shout out one particular
Yeah.
achievement that's making a difference to the community or
Cool. Yeah.
that, and trying to get a more public, more global recognition to
Right.
community members. And when they see that, I guess when they tweet that this is a common practice by the company and the community,
Mhm.
when he's following along with that, they'll see how recognition works and they want to get involved in that recognition process.
Right. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, because I just recognized somebody like last week. I sent him an email. He's in India, and he actually like did that for me. He was happy. He tweeted it, and then like our GitLab social team picked it up and it got broadcasted. But I should probably be a little bit more proactive in terms of like maybe once a month, like these are the people that I send GitLab merchandise to because of these reasons. Yeah, I definitely want to broadcast that more and recognize them for great work. So, go ahead, John. Yeah.
So, a lot of work at GitLab is like it's something right. Do we shout out like community contributors in the release post? We do like a monthly release at GitLab. Do we give them shout outs in the release post?
Yeah, I mean, but the challenge, so if you look at our release posts, our releases happen on 22nd of each month, and then in the release post, there'll be a recognition for an MVP. And then, I mean, this is something that I don't have a solution for. The tricky part is there's only one person that gets chosen, and then what if there's like 3 awesome contributions? So we kind of do a shout out to that one person, and then I think a swag gets sent out. But I think there's been like a discussions internally in Slack too, like why are we just having like one person get highlighted, and it's because somebody could come really close second, like 3 releases in a row and doesn't get recognized, right? But
we could do like a separate
yeah,
like post focused just on contributions.
right,
Same like cadence.
right,
And then just embed a link, in the release post to the
right,
community contribution post, and that way you can highlight not just the MVP, but also
right,
potentially first-time contributors or people that have some kind of streak going of consecutive months contributing, or other kind of unique, things if there's like,
right,
a high school student or something that contributes.
right,
Or Charlie's,
yeah,
Charlie's kid. We have a
right,
woman who works for us and both of her daughters are contributors, like 20 years old.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think in that instance, I think like she wanted her daughter sort of shielded from not publicity, but from social media. So I respect that. So no, I mean, I agree with you. I think I noticed that whenever I tweet something and if it gets retweeted by our social team, it's just like I see it like a 300x like in the number of impressions, like over 24-hour period. So, yeah, it's probably a good way of doing it. So, thank you. Go ahead.
Also, I mean, it depends how the pricing is structured for product, if you have our product, but
Mm-hmm.
if you have contributors making a contribution to your community edition,
Yeah.
it might make sense to give them, free access to like a single seat license for the
Yeah.
enterprise edition, since they would need, well, there's split screen
Right.
there as well. Maybe they can contribute to them, but they might have, better insight.
Right. I mean, John's already we have a heroes program that John's managing. So these are people, not just code contributors, but people that are active in terms of meetups, or somebody like Manrique that talks about GitLab at other venues. So we do give him the enterprise license. And then for contributors, like even if it's a first-time contributor, if they need a license to do like enterprise level testing, then I just give them all they need to do is like reach out to me, and I'm happy to give them as long as they're contributing to our EE features, I'm happy to renew their licenses. But yeah, maybe we need to make that more, maybe we need to publish it a little bit more. But yeah, that is definitely something that we should probably highlight. But cool. Yeah, any ideas, just let me know even after the session. So just switching gears a bit, so like I said earlier, this is like when I worked at the LF, this is a question I had, like at single company-based projects, why and how does community form? was my main question. And then, you know, before I get into that, I'll talk about, I guess it's, the text is getting cut off a bit, but hopefully you can make sense of it. But I'll talk a little bit about why, from our perspective, community contribution is important. I mean, I talked about our user conference that kicked off last year in September in Brooklyn. There was a person that was doing like a webcast during the whole event, and then they were interviewing a lot of people that were at the conference, and then I had a chance to sit down with the group, and one of the comments the interviewer made was that, well, isn't it great that we have a lot of these great engineers at GitLab, but you have this like a whole several hundred people that are also providing code for GitLab. And I mean, I understood the spirit of his comment, but I think that really undervalues the true value of the contribution. Because it's not just code that we, I mean, obviously code is great. I mean, code, like when somebody submits a code through an MR, they're basically providing a prototype to improve our product. So that accelerates our conversation. But what's more valuable than code is, and then this is a phrase that I heard from my colleague Tong, he's a backend engineer in New Zealand. What he told me was that when he sees a community contribution, like he always gains new insight into how people are using our product. Because people are submitting a merge request because they see an opportunity to improve the feature set that we currently have, or maybe something doesn't quite work in their environment, however they're using GitLab. And Tong says he gets to see these like new use cases or corner cases that he hasn't thought about, and to him, that's more valuable than code. Because I mean, because he, you know, if he gets insight into how people are using the product, he can probably write the code himself, but he can't do that if he doesn't have that insight. So it's that insight that we get from the outside of the company that's more valuable. And then if you take that a little further, if the insight is the more valuable commodity or more valuable asset, then you don't have to do that through code. I mean, you don't have to be a Ruby expert to contribute to GitLab. You can do that through discussions on issues or posting on forums. You know, our formal forum, or like a formal forum that gets formed by communities like on Reddit. So those are, I mean, beyond code, I mean, this is why we love engaging with the outside community members, because we get to learn something new. So why do people get involved? So this is a question that I asked when I started reaching out to the regular contributors when I started, and they fell like mostly in like three broad categories. I mean, one is I heard a lot of people saying, I've been using GitLab for X number of years and I love your product and I saw an opportunity to contribute, and that's sort of how they got hooked. Or they're a big DevOps enthusiast and they saw that we have CI/CD integrated with the code repository, and then they thought this was a great way to go, and that's how they got involved. Or I heard a couple of people say they're a big Ruby fan. I mean, big part of our software is written in Ruby. And then they wanted to look for an open source project based on Ruby, and during Google search, GitLab popped up, unfortunately. So that's sort of how they get engaged. So passion for the product or technology is one group of people. And the other is opportunities for continue their professional growth. So I met a couple of college students, like one in Brazil and the other in India, and they were looking for like an open source project to be involved in, because I mean they kind of knew that open source is, you know, having an experience in open source is a good way to find jobs. And I think for larger communities like OpenStack or Kubernetes, it might be a little bit intimidating coming in as a college student, and they through their friends and others, they got introduced to GitLab, and that's sort of how they got started, which was really nice. And I've also heard people say, you know what, like my current job I have to write in Python, but I still want to like hone my Ruby skills, going back to Ruby fans. Or their current job is more of a sysadmin type of role, but they want to like really hone their development skills. So they found a place, I mean, they got introduced to GitLab, and that's how they got started. And that's why they're continuing to contribute. The last one is this is mostly from people that have been in the GitLab community for a while. After they started contributing, they formed a bond with particularly a lot of our engineers, because through a number of like MRs or contributions, they got to know our engineers and they felt like they really bonded with them, formed a camaraderie. And the other thing I'm beginning to learn is that it's not just with GitLab engineers or GitLab team members, but like amongst themselves, like through online, they got to form a relationship, which I found very interesting. So those like, building the network or the sense of camaraderie is why they're coming back. And the other thing that I also heard or been seeing every time I talk to like new community members is that it's not even about the technology. Like I said, we're all remote. They love the fact that we're making all remote work, although we grew into over 1,200 people. So they feel like they're sort of helping with our mission or making like all remote possible. So that's why they're engaged, and that they feel like a camaraderie and kinship in our community. So moving to the next slide. So, so 3 categories: sense of belonging, career growth, or professional growth, and passion for a product or technology. So these are the 3 major buckets. Do these look any different than reasons why people get involved in communities like OpenStack or Kubernetes? It's an extremely rhetorical question, but the answer is no, right? If you look at these buckets, my learning early on was that the main motivation why people got involved or stay involved in the GitLab community is pretty similar to why people get involved or are passionate about various open source communities in general. So I realized like I don't really need to do something like drastically different to engage with the community and get them engaged and grow the community. I just need to pay attention to what gets people excited about open source. Which is a lot of it is intrinsic motivation. Like a lot of times they're not doing it for money. The recognition is always great, but especially like projects like GitLab, you're not being paid necessarily to contribute to our open source project, right? It's helping satisfy their intrinsic motivation, and that's what I try to sort of focus on in terms of working with community members. And actually, that responsibility for paying attention to intrinsic motivation is probably even bigger for company-based projects, because they're doing this in their own time. Like, for example, if you're contributing to Kubernetes because you work for company X and part of your job, I've seen people where their expectation from their management is that you're supposed to spend 25 or 50% of your time contributing to Kubernetes or being involved in that community. In those instances, if for whatever reason, if you want to like stop contributing to that project, like whether you're not interested in the technology or you feel kind of burnt out, it's a little bit more difficult to sort of extricate yourself from that project. Like, because you need to talk to your management. For whatever reason you want to sort of switch careers, or basically you need to change jobs or change your responsibilities, so you can't just like immediately walk away from a project. But for projects like GitLab, for whatever reason, if they're not interested in contributing anymore, it's really, really easy for them to walk away, right? So I need to really make sure that what we're doing is authentic, and then we're really paying attention to their intrinsic motivation, because the switching cost is really, really low. Right? When they walk away, if nothing else, they're going to have more free time in the evenings. So it's really like what's inside that matters. And then, I found this like on the web, like I wanted to use it somewhere. Open source developers are really a lot alike inside. It's the satisfying that intrinsic motivation, that's what's important. So what are some of the things that we've been doing at GitLab to support the community members? I'll talk about like 3 broad categories. One is lowering barriers to entry. This is not the typical lowering the barrier to entry talk that you probably heard. Things like having good documentation, making people feel welcome, and having access to mentorship to make it easy for people to contribute. That's obviously very important for all open source projects. But what I'm talking about here is access to information. Because you remember, like several slides ago, a lot of the contributors are not intimately involved in all the decisions that we make at GitLab, like things like marketing or even product roadmap. But we want them to be able to find information if they want to understand our reasoning for, postponing the availability of this feature until 13.5 for whatever reason. We want to make sure that its information is public. How we came to that decision is pretty transparent and well documented, and then information is there. What I really enjoy doing is, like, if somebody asks me a question, there's usually an issue where the discussion took place, or there's even a merge request when the handbook changes was made to change our policy to a certain extent. Then, if I'm able to sort of point to that information, that really helps them. Helps them stay sort of engaged in the community, because at least they're aware. Like, they may not agree with the decision, but they're at least aware of the thought process that went in when we came to that conclusion or a decision. So, having access to that information is important. And as another example, I talked about the core team meeting. I record them, and it's posted on our YouTube channel. If you want to look at the playlist for core team meetings, you'll find them. And I'm stunned that I don't market those video recordings. I'm stunned at the number of people that actually watch them. I think, like, after the January meeting, a few days later, I had to go back to our YouTube channel to check something else, and then I noticed that like 130 people view the recording. It's like, it's great, but I was like, I'm continuously amazed that, people just, first of all, they find the information, but they also consume it and then participate in it. Although it's sort of, they didn't participate in the meeting, but they know what we talked about during the call. Yeah, and then I met a community member at Scale last year, and he said that he recognized me from the core team meeting. Like, he told me he watches it every month, and my jaw just dropped. So it just reminded me that I need to stay coherent on those calls. But yeah, I'm just really amazed that people find that information valuable, and I'm glad that they get some use out of it. Next one, sense of belonging. This is the reason why people stay engaged. And one of the learnings, we talked about in-person events. We have an opportunity to interact with community members in person, every 9 months or so, a handful of people. But there are also other ways to sort of create a face-to-face event. So we started with a virtual hackathon in Q3 of 2018. And David's aware of this because I made this comment to him a couple of times. Like, when he first suggested it, I think I was somewhat skeptical. Like, I said, yeah, it's worth trying. I don't know how it's going to work out. And then, we haven't stopped. Every quarter it's like clockwork. The hackathon happens, and then I'm, really excited about the number of merge requests that we get during those 2 days. But what's more gratifying for me is that I see a lot of uptick in communications amongst the community members, trying to help each other out, encouragement, a coaching that happens from amongst community members, and it's really gratifying. During the 2-day event, I try to wake up pretty early to go to our contributor channel on Gitter to see if there are any questions that people have asked, and then there'll be tons of questions overnight. David's covered some of it because he's 9 hours ahead of me, but there'll still be other questions that David didn't have a chance to look at. But last time, 90% of them were answered by other community members. I didn't really have to do anything in terms of asking questions about, I'm having this issue with the GitLab development kit, or I can't find this issue. So it's really amazing to see that interaction and the growth in the community, and it's really gratifying. And it's related to that is the leadership opportunities, because people really step up, and they want to be coaches to other new community members, because hackathon typically attracts a lot of new contributors. And then, Rajendra is a person that I recognized about a month ago, and he tweeted it. I mean, he was like all over the place like a couple of weeks ago, like being very encouraging and helping people out. And then, I mean, what better way to sort of, you know, demonstrate or enhance your leadership skill, right, than in open source projects. The other thing that we started experimenting with in January is what's called the office hours. So we had an internal discussion about, I mean, Tim, he's a product manager for our package team, was having challenges like prioritizing, you know, how to prioritize certain feature requests that he was getting. And then we asked ourselves, like, why are we trying to figure this out ourselves? Like, let's ask the community and see what's important and how we should sort of, you know, plan our work. So that started, I mean, I started a conversation with Tim to get that started. So we started an office hour with community members dialing in. Their calls also recorded and posted to gather feedback and start a dialogue with the community members. And at the same time, Runners is a project at GitLab that gets a lot of community contributions, but we're struggling with the volume because we basically have most of last year 2 full-time engineers with a couple of others helping in their spare time. So we're struggling with like working through those merge requests. So the engineering manager and I said, let's do a office hour as well for the Runner team. With community members like dialing in and joining in those conversations. And then one of the calls, we just reviewed like one merge request that came from a community member. And then we spent like an entire hour sort of walking through, doing the review real time rather than doing asynchronously. You know, at the end, what we ended up suggesting to the community members was that the scope of your change is too large. You need to break it up into X many pieces, and then you want to start with like this little chunk. So that was sort of the conclusion of the call after an hour. And you know, after the call, like the 3 of us sort of got together on Slack, and we asked Steve, like, how did you feel about that? And you know, if you did this in like asynchronously, how long do you think it would have taken to get to that conclusion? And Steve said it probably would have taken like 4 hours, like going back and forth, you know, overhead and then like context switching because the interaction's not happening at the same time. So it was really valuable. And I think for the community member who was getting his MR reviewed in the real time, I mean, I have to say he was pretty courageous because it's not easy to get your code review like in a public setting like that on a call. But I mean, he appreciated like what the reviewers are looking for after the call. So we're going to continue to do that and see how it develops. But it's sort of the new format that we're experimenting with. The last one, I mean, it sort of talked about this, like a recognition and highlighting contributions. So, I mean, I think I've done blog posts, like highlighting some of the contributors, you know, various recognitions that we experimented with or we're continuing to experiment with. The one thing I sort of backed into is panels. So, I mean, I talked about our first user conference last year, and then one of our colleagues, Priyanka, like said, hey, Ray, how about doing this panel with open source communities that just moved to GitLab? So I sort of got volunteered and sort of backed into it. But what I learned afterwards was that, I mean, this is sort of a good way of not just like highlighting various contributors or community members' work, but panel typically involves like a lot less prep work. I mean, I wrote the CFP with their feedback. I mean, I started with the Google Doc and they helped me craft the CFP, but I sort of took the lead. But if I had to like individually reach out to them and says, can you do this like a presentation at our conference? I mean, it's just a lot more work for them. Like they have to write the CFP on their own. They have to create the slide deck. And I mean, some of you may have presented here, like, you know, presenting at conferences require a lot of prep work. But panel was pretty lightweight. I mean, I did a lot of the logistical type of work. And even before the panel, all I had to do was sort of schedule a 30-minute call. Here's sort of like a list of 10, 12 questions that I have in mind, like, what do you guys think? Got their feedback, and that was it. And then they were sort of ready to go and get on stage. And then also, I got like 3 or 4 people on stage to talk about their communities or their work. And I think they really enjoyed it because I mean, their employers or their communities are not necessarily going to go through the effort of sort of highlighting their work, so I was sort of happy to do that work for them. So I did another panel with some of our customers, like Renault and T-Mobile, who's been, as a customer, making contributions to GitLab. So I think we all had a lot of fun with that. I thought it was a good way of sort of recognizing people's work. I think that's the end of my slide. It is. Any questions? Or did I put everyone to sleep? Go ahead. So like having people transition from triaging issues to doing merge requests, or
yeah. People who were just filing issues or
yeah.
with GitLab.
Yeah.
Like, not to be like sort of curt with them and say, well, you fix it yourself if you want to do it, but
Right.
how can you kind of convert them into contributors?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good question. Like, how do we convert people from, like, people filing issues to doing a merge request? I mean, I think it'll depend on the issue that people are filing. If it sounds like they pretty much all the details sort of figured out, and not just me, I've had engineers do this. Like, oh, it's if you need any help with it getting started, they'll sort of offer their help to become contributors. And then you'll see a lot of like questions back and forth in terms of, oh, then what do I have to do here? What do I have to do here? And then our engineers are really good about sort of jumping on and say, yeah, I'll be sort of your coach and help you out. I mean, Scott was actually here yesterday. He's one of our front-end engineers. He did that with a college student in Brazil. Like, he sort of said, I'm going to help you figure out how to write tests and sort of get you started. So, I mean, we don't have anything formal, but I mean, the other thing that I want to talk about is, if I don't think we need to convert everybody into writing code. I mean, that's great if that's what they want to do. I mean, you were at the ChaosCon last month, because there was somebody from the university who talked about, I hate it when, because people sometimes start out contributing as a translator, or fixing documentation. She said, I hate it when people try to convert translators into programmers. Because what if that's what they don't want to do, and then it makes it feel like translation is just an entry-level thing that people want to do. And yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with that. I want to respect that, and because we have also community members that are passionate about fixing documentation. Like, I don't want to necessarily force them into, like, you're a lesser class citizen because you're not contributing code. But, we do want to find out ways to better support them if at some point they want to start contributing code and sort of make that easy. I mean, during the hackathon, the other thing that happens is that we have a lot of tutorials that get recorded from, like, our product managers and engineering managers. So I think those things will sort of help helping them figure out how to get started. So, I mean, sort of long-winded way of answering your question, but yeah. I mean, so one of the things that so churn rate for, like, contributors. I mean, one of the things that I started doing in 2018 was to recognize what I call, like, regular contributors. And then I set the bar, like, relatively low, like people who have 5 merge requests per year. Like, roughly you have, like, 1 every other month, like, get merged. So I think that number was like 35-ish in 2018, and I wanted to really grow that number because I mean, having casual contributors is great, but I want to have a bigger pool of people making, like, regular contributions. And that number, I mean, it was like close to 60, or I forget the exact figure for 2019. So, I mean, we definitely grew that number, but did we see a drop-off in people that were on the initial list in 2018? And yeah, I know there's been a few. I don't know the reasons why all of them dropped off, but some of them, like one person I think he changed jobs. Like he was now like writing something in Go as part of his new job. So I understand that he's busy. And then there's another case, the contributor I met here last year, same thing. He changed jobs, and unfortunately his new job, they're not using GitLab anymore. So that's why he can't necessarily find time to contribute. So I mean, there are like natural turns, and it's usually because I don't think people left because they didn't like where we're going in terms of technology or community. It's because a lot of personal reasons. And then, so I don't know if that helps, but yeah, cool. Any other questions or? Cool. Well, thanks everybody for coming. I'll be here, so if you have any questions, and then if you did volunteer, let's go. And remember to pick up your socks, except unless you're John. If you volunteered a word or phrases here. Not sure if there's something, one of these. So I think somebody mentioned CLA. I mean, we don't have a CLA if you're contributing to the community edition, and that's where bulk of the contributions are. So I think that's sort of, that's usually not a huge issue unless you're submitting or contributing enterprise-specific features. And review of community contributions, I think this is something that Manrique, you brought. We try to have, I mean, this is not like really written in stone or anything, but we have our ambitious goal of at least meaningful response within a couple of days when the contribution comes in. And then in most cases, I think we do a relatively good job, because I get a weekly report on MRs that hasn't been active in like number of like weeks. And those, then I try to follow up, whether it's contributor not getting back to us or our reviewers not getting back to the community member fast enough. On forums, I mean, we do have a discourse-based forum called forum.gitlab.com, but the other thing is we also pay attention. We have a team of advocates in the community relations team that also look through Twitter, Reddit, and other, I mean, they look at like 20+ channels that we try to pay attention to, because we don't want to just force people to just put all your questions on forum.gitlab.com, because like Reddit, we know that those are formed organically, right? And we want to be respectful for that, to that. Anything, roadmap. Was there a specific comment on the roadmap, or like, I don't know who asked that question, but yeah.
Yeah, I guess when roadmap comes to mind for a company-led approach,
Mm-hmm.
you get a lot of variability in the openness of that roadmap.
Right.
You report an issue and you're like, wow, this is really
Right.
what's slow, you want it to be solved, or a new feature that would really help you.
Mm-hmm.
You have no idea when, I guess, that will.
Right. So actually, this is another interesting thing about GitLab. Our roadmaps are public. So if you go to a handbook page, look for product directions, and then each of the, our product managers do a wonderful job of, this is sort of our priority for the upcoming like releases, or what we're trying to do by end of 2020 as an example. So I mean, some of the more mature product stages like create, or source code management, that's probably more fleshed out versus some of our new product areas. But yeah, so we tried to make that public, and then obviously people are free to open issues if they have any questions about our plan and why we're not doing something until end of this year. So yeah, so I mean, we don't have like a slide deck that's under NDA that you have to sign your life away for. So. Cool. Anything else, or how are we doing? Oh shoot. So I'm at time. Well, thanks again for coming, and feel free to pick up your socks, and I have Southern California themed stickers as well. Thanks again.